So the fall of the black man was complete and had nothing to do with either the curse of Canaan or any outside influence. As we all know, haughtiness comes before a fall and pride before destruction. After visiting Egypt, white scholar Count Constantine Duvalny wrote, "Just think, the race of black men today, our slave and object of our scorn, is the very race to which we owe our arts, sciences, and even the use of speech."
In order to justify the economic drive of the slave trade, there had to be the denigration of black people. Black people needed to be viewed as 3/5 of human beings, if you will. Viewed as animals, viewed as tools to build the dreams of the Europeans. And so people began to see these sculptures of people with clear Afroid features, the nose, the lips, the angle of the face, the profile, and it was just incontrovertible. The facts, the reality that black people had designed this civilization.
One member of the school of anthropology called the study of Egypt niggerology. I have a book in my library called Personalities of Antiquity, where the King Pianki, which was a, you could argue, started the 25th dynasty of Egypt, was called the most famous of the nigger kings. And there were arguments being presented in the public domain. There was a magazine called Fraser's Magazine in 1849, where a Thomas Carlyle was explaining how the black man should fit into society, and said he should be a step above the domesticated animals, and that the black man, if we were to emancipate him, would be robbed of his rightful leader, which would be the white man. It would be a crime against him.
So on one hand, you have the slave trade. On the other hand, we have the tremendous civilization that black people had created.
There was a definite crisis of the conscience, because there were white brothers really intensely fighting this thing called slavery, and they were pushing for the liberation of the black man, condemning the trade itself, and freeing slaves in America, and they were torn. And so you can see where the impetus and the need to formulate rationalizations for this developed.
What to do? What are the anthropologists and archaeologists going to do in dealing with this information? And that is what I believe, what sponsored, maybe consciously in some cases, unconsciously in other cases, what we could call the cover-up. The cover-up of the accomplishments of black people. Chancellor Williams wrote a book called The Destruction of Black Civilization. And in this book he outlined 7 points as to why he feels that there was a cover-up.
Ignore. Just refuse to publish any facts of African history that don't go along with our racial theories.
We need to create a religious and a scientific doctrine so that African slavery won't appear that bad after all.
What we need to do is flood the world with new African histories that contain our European perspectives only.
Start renaming people and places. Replace African names with Arabic and European names. This will disguise their true black identity.
Let's change the criteria for defining race. For example, 1 drop of Negro blood in America makes you a Negro, no matter how light the skin.
Yes, and when reporting ancient African history, reverse the standard. No matter how dark the skin, woolly the hair, or thick the lips, you don't have to be a Negro.
When black contribution to civilization is too obvious, let's find a way to attribute it to outside white influences.
When all the ancient historians contradict your theory, we'll just discredit them.
Chancellor Williams was a scholar, and we feel that his observations have a lot of merit to them. But there are his personal observations. Talk about the the rewriting of history, we have to set that in the context that we're talking about during the 1800s is when this started. We're not really talking about contemporary scholars primarily when dealing with this subject. You could not go from Egypt being a Negro civilization to being a white civilization without rewriting some things.
All the high school courses I took and the history course at the University of Maryland, that African American history was omitted. And after I read a book on African American history, I thought, whoa, I've been shortchanged. All of us have. I didn't know that 5,000 African Americans fought in the American Revolution for the freedoms that they didn't even enjoy at the time. I needed to learn more. My textbooks did not give me the education in this area. And the many people I talk to, the same thing happens. There's a real lack of knowledge of Black America.
But what effect did this cover-up and exclusion of information have on the black male?
I began to interview African American men. I wanted men, especially over the ages of 35, because I wanted some men with some perspective. So as I began to talk with men, I began to see the survivor guilt of middle-class blacks, if you will. The issues of trying to assimilate into white America, trying to control the rage, having to work 2, 3, 4 times harder for an African American male, sometimes 8, 9, 10 times harder for an African American female to be just accepted as average. And I began to see that it was not so much looking for forgiveness for the whole issue of slavery, but also just to have these issues in terms of the economic and social issues and the justice issues addressed in a manner that would be allowing everyone to play at the same level.
Our status as African American men is still one of trying to find our true identity. I think for the most part many of us are still confused about who we are. As a result of that, some of our younger children are now finding themselves in a hip-hop generation, which is loosely defined as being roughnecks or thugs, and as a result of that, we see that they're searching for themselves through their expression of music and through the art form of hip-hop and rap.
Kids today, the reason they're falling into this whole gangster image is because they don't recognize who they are and where they've come from, and they've bought a lie. And somehow we have to be able to address the lie, remove the deception, and lift up a different vision, a different portrait of what young black men and young black